I was a pizza delivery driver for 8 months here in Midtown Detroit. It felt like years. I've had some real crappy jobs since I dropped out of college, but being a delivery driver was by far the worst thing I've ever had to do for money. It goes way beyond just being talked to like a moron by some heavy-set Armenian shop owner or being screwed of a tip by some white trash bimbo who lies about the lateness of her order. I've been robbed, beaten up, and almost killed on the job. The first time was when I was delivering to an apartment building over near 8 Mile. I had just gotten out of my car and was grabbing the pies from the back seat when I saw a group of teenagers rapidly approaching. They started to make jokes about how beat up my old Taurus was, and I suppose I'd be lying if I said they had no grounds to do so. That thing was a goddamn rust box. They were talking trash and I was given as good as I got. Seemed like it was just a bit of fun. That's when I feel one of their hands reach into my pockets, trying to grab the folded stack of dollar bills I use for change. I was pissed, but when I turned, one of the kids had pulled this huge knife out, telling me to hand over the cash. I just kinda reacted. I threw the only thing I had available to me right at that little knife holder. I didn't expect this, but as I threw the pizza box, the whole thing just sort of fell apart in midair, freeing the hot pie to land right in the kid's face. I always knew our shop had a reputation for delivering piping hot. I guess that's why it was so busy. But with the way that kid started screaming when the molten cheese stuck to his thieving face, wow, it was ear-splitting. I saw that same kid a few days later, had bandages all over the side of his face the pizza landed on. I'd be lying if I said that didn't make me smile. It wasn't even the robberies that were the worst though, because a few years back, something started happening to pizza delivery drivers here in Midtown that's almost straight out of a horror film. A big part of gang initiations around here is taking a potential member out to jump someone. But since they were doing this in public, the cops got wise pretty quickly. After trios of scumbag Crip or Blood clones were getting locked up on the daily, the gangsters decided to smarten up a little. God knows whose idea it was, but some way, somehow, someone must have gotten the idea to ambush delivery drivers after luring them to abandoned spots throughout the city. The first I heard of this was a guy from another shop getting called to a quiet, mostly derelict neighborhood on the edge of town. He'd arrived at this big red brick house, walked up to the front steps. Apparently, there was a handwritten sign on the door that read something like, "Doorbell's broken. Come around back, there's a tip in it for you." Tip must have been the magic word that did the trick. Pizza box in hand, the guy walked into the backyard of this big old house where he saw some kid, pistol in hand. No one knows what exactly went down, but it ended with the delivery driver being shot in the head and neck before the assailants stole nothing more than $20 in change and single bills. His funeral was a month ago now. A few of the drivers at my shop stopped by to pay their respects. I didn't though because I felt like I'd be imposing. Besides, I never mentioned it to anyone, but I didn't really like that guy. No one deserves to lose their life over a goddamn delivery job though. But this was right in the middle of this whole gang initiation thing happening. Who would drive out to an abandoned neighborhood after getting an order of any topping, any soda? After that, the shop I was delivering for started to blacklist neighborhoods that were forbidden to deliver to after dark. Even that didn't keep us entirely safe though. A buddy of mine at the same shop managed to get himself jacked in the middle of the day, delivering to a fancy residential neighborhood. Some gang members had busted into a house whose owners were on vacation. He rang the doorbell, they pulled him inside and proceeded to rob him of the maximum $20 in change. When he told them truthfully that was all he had on him, they beat him half to death before stealing his car. He was in the hospital for a week while his jaw was wired shut. That leads me to my last delivery that I ever drove for Armin the Armenian's pizza place. The fancy townhouse beating my buddy had suffered left me quite paranoid. Because of this, I borrowed a .44 revolver, thinking that maybe I should just go ahead and quit sometime soon. It was surreal in the extreme, being given the rundown on how to load and fire the thing and where to best shoot someone. It was like I was enlisting in the army or something. I had to remind myself this was only a pizza delivery job. So I rock up to the address I'd been given, 2 pizzas in the back seat, when I notice it's suspiciously quiet. There's a public park on the other side of the street, and thanks to a row of bushes, I couldn't see anything from approaching that angle. I started to get a bad feeling, a really bad feeling. I took the .44 out of my glove box. That's when I saw a man emerge from the bushes on the other side of the street, wearing one of those goddamn clown masks. That's right, when all those attention-starved assholes were putting on clown masks and scaring people for the sake of getting a perfect viral video. But I wasn't taking any chances. I tapped on the glass with the revolver in hand, looking over at the guy and pointing the gun plainly in view. He stopped, took one look at his revolver, and reached behind his back into the waistband. I remember cracking the window and shouting, "Don't do it if you don't want to get shot." I'm not a particularly brave guy, but I don't know. The thought of ending up with a wired jaw, and the thought of that poor kid who went out to work one night and never came home. I was ready to kill that son of a bitch in the clown mask. He just wasn't a real person to me. He was like a living embodiment of everything I hated about living in this city. I kept the gun pointed at him as I drove away, the 2 pizzas still in the back seat. I quit the moment I arrived back at the shop. Armin didn't even act surprised when I handed him back my uniform and collected the money I was owed for that shift. It's been a while since I quit, but I still think about it most days. It's in the news all the time. Some driver getting robbed or beat or worse. Everyone seems terrified of automation right now, but it can't come soon enough for some jobs. Jobs that just aren't worth losing your life over. I've had a few delivery jobs that have given me the creeps over the years. 1 or 2 that I was pretty sure I was about to be robbed. Another where a gunfight between gang members unfolded right in the street I was delivering to, right as I was turning onto it. But these are just occupational hazards. Yeah, it sucks, but you get over it. Only one job has ever truly terrified me, one that scares me to think about even today. So, we get an order from an address that none of us drivers had ever delivered to before. This normally causes some suspicion among us, since we're always pretty wary whenever delivering to a new address. A fair few first-time deliveries end up resulting in an address getting blacklisted immediately. Sometimes they just try to stiff you for money, or scam to get a free pizza. Generally speaking, the drivers take turns delivering to a new address, and this time it just so happened to be my turn. So, once the order was completed and the pizzas were all boxed up, I took them out to the car and punched in the address to my sat-nav. It turns out the address was right at the very edge of our delivery area, pretty much right in the middle of absolute nowhere. It dawned on me that this could be the oldest trick in the book. Call the pizza in some hard-to-reach location, then demand it to be free once it takes more than 45 minutes to deliver. To my relief, though, I made it out to this old dirt road with plenty of time to spare. Yet my relief did not last long, at least not when I saw the state of the address I was supposed to be delivering to. The house was so run down, it looked like a squat. Like it had been commandeered by the homeless as a place to avoid sleeping rough. There was a rusty old pickup in the driveway, its wheels askew from years of misuse. I mean, this place was the very definition of haunted house. Needless to say, I was not expecting a particularly generous tip. As I took the pizzas out from my passenger seat of the car, I started to hear this faint whining noise. My ears picked it up immediately, and I froze, trying to work out just what that sound was and where it could be coming from. I came to realize it was the sound of a violin being played. More accurately, the sound of a violin being played extremely badly. These discordant noises carried on as I walked up the dirt pathway toward the porch and the front door. The drag of some old violin bow across dry, old strings that were way out of tune was creepy, sure, but not what terrified me. When I knocked on the door, the screaming cat sound ceased instantly. A few moments of silence went by before I began to hear slow, heavy footsteps, steadily growing closer. I can't be exactly certain, but I'm almost sure I could hear someone breathing on the other side, these heavy, labored breaths as I waited for the door to open. The silence was broken by a metallic snap of the door unlocking before hurried footfalls sounded on the other side. Someone had unlocked the door, then scampered away from it as if they were overly skittish about visitors. Hello? I got your pizza order here." I remember calling out, feeling the tension rise once again as silence engulfed the scene. "Come on, mister." A childish voice came from the other side. I wanted to turn tail and run at this point, but returning to the pizza place without the money for the pizzas would definitely mean a verbal or written warning from my manager. I already had one for turning up late, and I couldn't afford another. Reluctantly, I took hold of the door handle, turned it, and walked inside. The interior of the house was completely bathed in darkness. Only a handful of weak oil lamps gave me any sense of the layout. There was a figure crouched on a nearby sofa, the old violin lying next to it. "There's $15 here on the table, mister." The person sounded like a child, but they looked much bigger. On the small, dusty coffee table, right in front of the couch, there was a pile of change. Normally, I'd have taken issue with this, but to be honest, I was desperate to get out of there at that point. I'd have taken any form of currency. As soon as I stooped down to start sliding the pile of coins into my cupped palm, I started to hear labored breathing again. I dared not look toward that person. I could see their legs in my peripheral vision, but even then, I could see how unnaturally long they were. This person was clearly not a child. Sorry about the coins, mister. I saved them all up to afford this treat for myself. It's all I have." I told the person not to worry, in the sunniest disposition I could muster. The last thing I wanted to do was upset them. I pocketed the coins, barely having counted them at all. Hell, I'd come up with the difference myself if I needed to. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. As I turned to leave though, hastily thanking the person for their purchase, I caught a glimpse of their face in the low light of the oil lamps. They were burned, horribly burned all the way up their arms and chest. The scarred flesh extended all the way up to their face and head. The person's only visible features were obscured by a small rubber mask. The mask didn't even cover their entire face, only a small central portion that concealed their eyes, nose, and mouth. It had a long wooden nose, kind of like Pinocchio. The small carved eyes were blank. I averted my gaze away from the mask. It was one of the most hideously sad and scary things I'd ever laid eyes on. Just as I reached the front door, I heard that same childlike voice emanating from right behind me. "Want to hear me play a song, mister?" Before I even had the chance to answer, to tell them I was too busy, they grabbed the old violin next to them and began to whine out a tune. Although the strings were almost totally out of tune, I started to make out the tune they were trying to go for. You know the one. If you go down in the woods today, you're sure of a big surprise. If you go down in the woods today, you better go in disguise. I rushed back to the driver's seat of my car before you could even say, "No, I'm out," scrambling to start the engine. I tried to make a quick getaway. I don't think the person had any intention of harming me. I certainly wasn't in as much danger as when those dumbass Crip blood wannabes decided to shoot it out right in front of my car. But something about that scene still creeps back into my mind when I lie there in the darkness, trying to go to sleep. Something that means I'll never ever make another delivery there. I'll quit before I have to go back. I took a gap year before I started university, and I would highly recommend one to all those who have doubts over higher education or are second-guessing their choice of course. Getting a job and suffering the daily grind was something that really helped me to grow as an individual. In other words, working for minimum wage sucks ass, and I had absolutely no intention of getting stuck in a dead-end job like that. The whole experience made me hungry for the chance to earn a better place in society. But what can you expect as a pizza delivery driver? I know for a fact it's one of the most soul-destroying jobs a person can have, filled with all kinds of employment pitfalls like paying for your own gas, getting your wages docked for late delivery, and getting treated like a criminal by your taskmaster turned manager. Honestly, I can't complain too much though. My dad helped me out with the finance on a cheap second-hand car. He even gave me a hand in getting the old rusty thing back in working order. I may or may not have picked delivery driver to put him in that position in the first place, but that's a story for another time. So, the owner who'd given me the job in the first place was a top bloke, a Kurdish fella who'd escaped Saddam's Iraq in the early 90s. He'd come here with no more than 100 quid to his name, but by the time I came to work for him, he was definitely worth more than $1 million. Most of his money would have been tied up in various takeaway businesses, but the spanking new white BMW he drove around said it all. The guy stayed pretty humble though. He always greeted you warmly, remembered your name, asked after your family. Like I said, a top bloke. The English guy he'd hired as a manager though was not so nice. In fact, I'd go so far as to say he was a complete wanker. Good at his job, don't get me wrong. The place ran like clockwork, but the man had next to no social skills and really rubbed the staff the wrong way a lot of times. Like this one time, when he found out that one of the delivery drivers had been losing pizzas. He did investigating and found out he was losing them to the same address over and over again. He'd come up with a different story every time. Dropped the box, some teenagers stole it. Turned out he'd just been dropping them off at his friend's house. He got the sack, but it was us, the drivers, that remained, that really bore the brunt of it. He instituted a policy whereby anyone who failed to deliver their order would have the same amount docked from their wages, not the cost of the business, but the full sale amount, considerably more than the sum of any pizza's parts. We were pissed off, but I don't know really. So, this is how I almost ended up breaking into someone's house one night trying to deliver their pizza. I drive out to the delivery address in my beat-up old Volhall, listening to the newly fitted engine purring like a dream. It was one of my last deliveries of the night, with the cutoff time being 11 p.m. I had that kind of second wind excitement that comes with knowing you're off work soon. Still singing along with the radio in my car, I pulled up outside this big old Victorian 3-story. I grabbed the thermal bag from off the passenger seat, then strolled up to the front door. This was about the time of night that tips get pretty big too. People can be very happy to receive hot food at this hour, especially when they've been partaking in a certain variety of tobacco, if you catch my drift. Anyway, I whistle away to myself, banging on the front door of this old house. Banging, knocking, banging again. About a minute goes by, and it dawned on me that no one was answering. Must have been some sort of mistake, I think to myself. I head back to the car to check the delivery notes to make sure I've gotten the right address. This is where the problem arises. I couldn't really tell if the person who'd written it down had put down a 1 or a 7. I decided it had to be a 1. The thing about the UK is we don't really get those crazy long house numbers like people in the States do. So, with me being 90% sure this was the right house, but being 100% worried I was about to have 20 quid docked from my already meager wage, I set about trying to deliver this bastard pizza. I legged it to the front door, hammered on it once more just in case, then decided to take things a step further. I started shouting, "Hello, anyone there?" through the rectangular brass letterbox. The only thing I could hear in response, though, was the meowing of cats, like a boatload of cats. I got this absolutely horrendous whiff of something truly disgusting. I suppose the cats meant a lot of full litter boxes. Gross, but true. I went to the living room window, just a few feet away from the front door. There was a little crack in the curtain, where I could just barely peek through to see if anyone was home. You'd be surprised at the amount of people that call for a pizza when they're not even there, thinking they'll be fast enough to get home before it arrives. When I peered through, though, I saw something that I can still see when I close my eyes sometimes. The room was dimly lit, only the flickering gray of TV static illuminating the interior. It took me a few moments to realize what I was actually looking at. I could see one couch was absolutely teeming with felines. I mean, every square inch was covered in cats. Just a veritable legion of little furballs surrounding it, trying to leap up and join their feasting friends. Yeah, that's right, feasting. For on that very couch lay the dead body of their former owner. Her cats had barely even waited till her body was cold before they scrambled all over it. I could see them plucking out her eyes and chewing her lips off. They were tearing away at the soft parts. Anywhere not covered with clothing was a mess of blood and torn flesh. Her own cats were eating her right in front of me. I called the police when I got back to the shop, actually giving the prick manager the finger when he tried to interrupt me giving a full account to the dispatcher. They thanked me for informing them, and I actually read about the whole thing on a local news site the following morning. The dickhead manager tried to dock my wages for the non-delivery. When he told me that, I just quit there and then. Big twist, the Kurdish owner called me up the next day. He called to ask if I was okay after witnessing that horrifying thing, and more importantly, to offer me my job back. He'd hashed it out with the manager himself over unfairly trying to dock me. He supported the policy to an extent, but never in a case such as this. I took the job back, but I did have a favor to ask him. I'd be looking for a better job, but I needed a good reference. I was 18 and had never been employed before. Getting those was a nightmare. He promised to give me a glowing one. I actually ended up getting an interview for a law firm to work as a legal apprentice. Low pay, but not no pay. This is pretty much exactly what I needed to secure myself a place on a law course at Newcastle University. In the end, I guess the guy talked me up to be some sort of prodigy. I got into my uni, and I graduate next year. Oh, and just my luck. What I'd thought surely was a 1 did turn out to be a 7 in the end. What an unfortunate thing I stumbled upon. About 2 years ago, I used to work part-time at a popular pizza chain as a delivery driver. I had a full-time job during the day, so the shift at the pizza place would be from around 6 p.m. to 12 p.m. I enjoyed the job for the simple fact that I made quite good money. It was fairly easy as well, but I hated working at night because it was really dangerous. One night, we got a call 30 minutes before closing for a delivery in the worst part of town. I was stuck taking the order since my manager had sent the other driver home early. It was a really slow night that night. I hurriedly headed out to deliver that pizza. About 20 minutes later, my GPS said I'd arrived at the location. I couldn't read the house number though, as it was pitch dark. None of the houses had their porch lights on either. As a safety, I called the customer to ask if they could turn on the light to their home. They didn't answer until the 6th ring. He told me his house had 2 trash bins next to the curb, and the light was broken so he couldn't turn it on at the moment. I started walking through the front yard to the front door of the house I assumed it was, only to see a man staring at me through the window. I yelled out to him, but there was no reaction. He didn't even move to open the door. I started to get goosebumps, and I decided to turn around and go back to my car. I called the customer once more and told him to come out to my car to get his pizza. He told me in a slow, creepy voice to ignore his roommate. He said the door was unlocked and to take the pizza to the basement because he rented the bottom floor. As I was on the phone, I could make out a small light from the window. The man that was staring at me earlier was now on the phone talking to me. I assume he thought I couldn't see him. I hung up and took off right away. By the time I got back to the restaurant, phones were turned over. Any complaints would have to wait until the next day. I was not delivering to any basements, and I went home taking that pizza for dinner.